Section 19 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. As You Like It, Part 2, In the Forest of Arden. On reaching home after the wrestling match, Orlando was met by the old retainer, Adam, who implored him to fly at once. The fame of his victory had already reached Oliver's ears, and he was so incensed at the praises lavished on his brother that he was quite resolved to do away with him by some means or other. The faithful old man went on to say that he had 500 crowns saved during his service with his late master, and he begged Orlando to take this money, and also to let him go with him as his servant. He was old, he said, but still strong and active, and can serve him as well as a younger man. Orlando was deeply touched by the fidelity and devotion of this old retainer, and willingly agreed to his request, saying that before the money was spent they would doubtless have found some humble means of support. So the outcasts departed. The young man left the home of his father, and the old man the place where he had spent more than 60 years of faithful service. They started not unhopefully, but matters did not go well with them. Scarcely knowing where to direct their steps, they plunged into the forest of Arden, and there, in the depths of the greenwood, they lost their way. Worn out with fatigue, almost starving for food, they wandered on, till at last Adam's strength failed, and he sank to the ground.
"Dear master, I can go no further. Oh, I die for food," he gasped. "Farewell, kind master."
With the tenderest of words, Orlando strove to cheer the poor old man, and, carefully placing him in a more sheltered spot, he dashed off almost desperate in his quest for food. Not far off in the forest, a very different scene was taking place. In the bright days of early summer, the days slipped pleasantly past with the banished Duke and his little band of faithful followers. Clad in their forester's garb and living the simple life of outlaws, they hunted, sang, laughed, and feasted under the greenwood tree. The most notable of the band was a certain lord called Jaques, who had been a brilliant and reckless courtier in his early days, but was now a cynic and philosopher, half sad, half satiric, whose moods seemed to vary between biting humor and pensive melancholy. He had a sharp tongue, and took no pains to make himself agreeable, but his quaint moralizings afforded much entertainment to his companions, and especially to the Duke. On the day when Orlando and Adam were starving in one part of the forest, the Duke and his band were having a merry time in the other part. One of the lords, by name Amiens, could sing very pleasingly, and he now led a ditty in praise of their woodland life, while the others joined in the chorus. Under the greenwood tree, who loves to lie with me, and turn his merry note unto the sweet bird's throat? Come hither, come hither, come hither. Here shall he see no enemy, but winter and rough weather. Who doth ambition shun, and loves to live in the sun, seeking the food he eats, and pleased with what he gets? Come hither, come hither, come hither. Here shall he see no enemy, but winter and rough weather. The banquet was spread, and the Duke had taken his place when Jaques came up, apparently much diverted with something he had just seen. A fool, he cried. "I met a fool in the forest." The cynical lord was amused to find a fellow philosopher under the motley of a fool, and quoted the mangled scraps of moral wisdom he had let fall, with much enjoyment.
Good morrow, fool, quoth I. No, sir, quoth he. Call me not a fool till heaven hath sent me fortune. Then he drew a dial from his pocket, and looking at it with his dull eyes, said very wisely, It is 10 o'clock. Thus we may see how the world wags. An hour ago it was 9 o'clock, and in another hour it will be 11. And so from hour to hour we ripe and ripe, and from hour to hour we rot and rot. And thereby hangs a tale.
Jaques was greatly diverted at the idea of a fool in motley moralizing thus on the time, and declared that henceforth he intended to don a fool's dress himself, in order that he might have the privilege that fools have of speaking out his mind freely on all occasions. "And those that are most hurt with my folly," he said, "they most must laugh. Dress me in motley, and give me leave to speak my mind, and I will guarantee to cure the world of much evil." The Duke would not agree that Jaques' plan for reforming the world was a good one, and reminded Jaques that he himself was anything but free from faults. Jaques still held to his opinion, and was arguing the matter when their discussion was interrupted by the startling appearance of a haggard youth with a drawn sword, who demanded food in the most peremptory fashion, and threatened to kill anyone who attempted to eat until his wants were supplied.
"I almost die for food. Let me have it," he cried fiercely.
"Sit down and feed, and welcome to our table," said the Duke kindly. When Orlando saw the gentleness of the Duke, and that there was no occasion for such violence on his part, he softened at once, asked their pardon, and explained that he had only put on this stern manner of command because he expected to find everything in the forest rude and savage. He implored them, if ever they had led a gentle, civilized life, and knew what pity was, that they would refrain from eating till he had fetched a poor old man who was spent with age and hunger. Till he was first satisfied, Orlando said, he would not touch a bit. The Duke bade Orlando go and fetch Adam, and when they returned he made them sit down and eat before he troubled them with any questions. To give them time to recover, he called for some music, and bade Amiens sing. "Blow, blow, thou winter wind, thou art not so unkind as man's ingratitude. Thy tooth is not so keen, because thou art not seen, although thy breath be rude. Freeze, freeze, thou bitter sky, that dost not bite so nigh as benefits forgot. Though thou the waters warp, thy sting is not so sharp as friend remembered not." While the song was being sung, Orlando was able to tell the Duke, in a low voice, a little of his story, and hearing that he was the son of his dear friend Sir Roland de Boys, the Duke gave him a hearty welcome, and carried him off to his own cave to hear the rest of his adventures. Old Adam, too, was made right welcome, and so, for the present, he and his master contentedly stayed on with the outlaws. The fool whom Jaques had met in the forest was Touchstone. Like Orlando and Adam, the other party of wanderers were very weary before they found a resting place. Rosalind and Celia, attended by the court jester, had come in search of Rosalind's father, but so far they had found no trace of the banished Duke. Celia was tired, and Touchstone was cross, but Rosalind did her best to encourage her companions. "Well, this is the forest of Arden," she said cheerfully.
"Aye, now I'm in Arden," grumbled Touchstone. "The more fool I. When I was at home, I was in a better place, but travellers must be content."
"Aye, be so, good Touchstone," counselled Rosalind. "Look you who comes here, a young man and an old in solemn talk." The newcomers were two shepherds called Corin and Silvius. The young man, Silvius, soon went away, and then Rosalind appealed to the old shepherd, asking if he could direct them to any place where they could rest themselves and get something to eat. Corin replied that he would gladly have helped them if he could, but his fortune was very humble. He was only shepherd to another man, and did not own the flocks he looked after. His master was very churlish and inhospitable, and besides, at this moment his cottage and flocks were on sale, so there was no food at home that he could offer them. However, if they liked to come and rest in the cottage, they were heartily welcome. Rosalind asked who was going to buy the flock and pasture. Corin replied that it was the young swain who had just left them, and who cared nothing at all about the matter. "I pray you, if you can do so honestly, buy the cottage, pasture, and flock," said Rosalind, "and we will give you the money to pay for them." "And we will increase your wages," added Celia. "I like this place, and would willingly spend some time here." So Celia and Rosalind, still attended by Touchstone, took up their abode in the shepherd's cottage, and that was how the cynical Lord Jaques happened to meet the fool in the forest. End of section 19. Section 20 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. As You Like It, Part 3. The Shepherd Youth. Orlando, in his new life, did not forget the lady whom he had seen at the wrestling match, and who had so quickly won his heart. As he had no chance of speaking to Rosalind, the only way in which he could show his love was to carve her name on all the trees, and perpetually write verses in her praise, which he hung all over the forest. "Hang in there, my verse, in witness of my love," he would say. "O Rosalind, these trees shall be my books, and I will trace my thoughts in their bark, so that every eye which looks in the forest shall see your praise everywhere." Rosalind came across some of these papers, and wondered greatly who the person could be who thus carved and hung her name on all the trees. But Celia, who had found some of the verses, was able to enlighten her, for she had happened to see the writer. On hearing that it was really Orlando, Rosalind became quite excited, and Celia had no time to answer half the eager questions showered on her before Orlando himself came that way. Rosalind now for the first time rather regretted her boy's dress, for of course Orlando did not recognize the cousins in their present attire. But at any rate, in the guise of a saucy youth, she determined to have a little fun, and presently a whimsical idea occurred to her nimble brain. Seeing how disconsolate Orlando was, she suggested to him that she should pretend to be really his Rosalind, and that he should address all his affectionate speeches and verses to her exactly in the same way as he would have done to the real person. If he did this, she said, she would soon cure him of his love. Orlando replied that he did not want to be cured, but all the same he was perfectly willing to go every day to the shepherd's cottage and talk to this youth as if he were really Rosalind. The plan succeeded admirably. Since he could not have Rosalind herself, it pleased Orlando to be always talking about her, and he did not notice how much in earnest this half-jesting companionship gradually became. As time went on, the exiles from Duke Frederick's court made other acquaintances in the forest. Touchstone had found an object of interest, which served as an excellent butt for displaying his satire. This was a rustic goatherd, called Audrey, a simple, not bad-natured girl, but one of the very stupidest and most ignorant specimens of humanity possible to imagine. Touchstone seemed to be quite fascinated by her extreme silliness, and, out of sheer perversity, declared he meant to marry her. As for Audrey, she was perfectly unconscious of any ridicule he chose to lavish on her, and followed Touchstone about like a willing little slave. Rosalind and Celia also had come across Jaques, and the latter would willingly have become closer friends with the shepherd youth, but Rosalind's sunny nature had nothing in sympathy with this cynic. "They say you are a melancholy fellow," she said one day, in answer to a suggestion from Jaques that they should become better acquainted. "I am so. I love it better than laughing," he replied.
"It is good to be sad and say nothing."
"Why, then, it's good to be a post," remarked Rosalind. There were many different kinds of melancholy, Jake was explained, such as the scholars, the musicians, the courtiers, the soldiers, etc. His, however, was a melancholy of his own, compounded of many different ingredients, but especially due to reflections over his travels.
"Yes, I have gained my experience,"
he ended with mournful satisfaction. "And your experience makes you sad?" quoth Rosalind. "I would rather have a fool to make me merry than experience to make me sad, and to travel for it too." But the joyous free life of the forest was drawing to a close, though much happiness was still in store for those who had wandered there. A day came when Orlando for once failed to keep his tryst. He had left Rosalind, promising to return within an hour, but in his stead there came to the two cousins a stranger bearing a handkerchief stained with blood. Briefly he told his tale. Orlando had been walking through the forest when he saw a wretched man, ragged and unkempt, sleeping under a tree. Round his neck a green and gilded snake had twined itself, and its head was just poised to strike, when, seeing Orlando, it glided away under a bush. But the peril was not yet over, for under that very bush couched a famished lioness, watching like a cat to pounce on the sleeping man the moment he should stir. And having seen this, Orlando approached, and found it was his brother, his eldest brother. Remembering the cruel way in which Oliver had always treated him, his first impulse was to leave him to his fate. But his better nature conquered. Orlando did battle with the lioness, who quickly fell before him. "And in the noise of the struggle I awakened from my miserable slumber," said the stranger. "Are you his brother? Was it you who so often plotted to kill him?" asked Celia.
"It was I, but it is I no longer," said Oliver.
Orlando's noble behavior had completely overcome his malicious nature. All evil thoughts against Orlando were banished, and for the future the two brothers were the best of friends. Oliver was made welcome by the Duke, and was afterwards talking to Orlando in his own cave, when his brother, calling on the name of Rosalind, suddenly fainted. His arm had been badly torn by the lioness, and had been bleeding all this time. Oliver revived him, bound up the wound, and after a little, Orlando, being brave of heart, begged his brother, stranger as he was, to find his friends at the shepherd's cottage, and explain to them why he had been unable to keep his promise. He sent the handkerchief dyed in his blood to the shepherd youth, whom he had called in sport his Rosalind. On hearing of the peril through which Orlando had passed, Rosalind was so moved that she almost betrayed herself by fainting. Oliver was somewhat astonished at such weakness on the part of a youth, but Rosalind tried to pretend it was only a counterfeit. Her pale looks, however, showed too plainly that the swoon was no counterfeit, though she persisted in declaring it was, and bade Oliver carry back word to Orlando how well she had pretended to faint. The sweetness and grace of Celia made so strong an impression on Oliver that he soon fell deeply in love with her, and as she was equally attracted by him, and as he was now quite converted from his former evil nature, it was agreed that they should be married without delay. Orlando did all he could to help forward the wedding, though the sight of his brother's good fortune made him realize only more clearly his own unavailing love for Rosalind.
"They shall be married tomorrow, and I will bid the Duke to the nuptial," he said.
"But oh, how bitter a thing it is to look into happiness through another man's eyes." "Why then tomorrow? I cannot serve your turn for Rosalind?" asked the real Rosalind.
"I can live no longer by thinking," said Orlando.
"I will weary you, then, no more with idle talking," said Rosalind. "Know now that I speak to some purpose. Believe, if you please, that I can do strange things. I have, since I was 3 years old, conversed with a magician deeply skilled in his art. If you love Rosalind as heartily as you appear to, then when your brother marries Aliena, you shall marry Rosalind. I know into what straits of fortune she is driven, and it is not impossible to me, if it does not seem inconvenient to you, to set her before your eyes tomorrow, human as she is, and without any danger."
"Do you speak in sober earnest?" demanded Orlando, scarcely able to credit what he had heard.
"I do on my life, which I value tenderly, though I am a magician. Therefore put on your best array, invite your friends, for if you will be married tomorrow, you shall, and to Rosalind if you will."
The promise, which appeared so amazing to Orlando, was of course easily kept, and the following day, when the Duke and all the wedding guests assembled to witness Oliver's wedding, Rosalind and Celia appeared without their disguise and in their real attire. This banished Duke found a daughter, and Orlando found his Rosalind. In the midst of the wedding festivities arrived the second son of Sir Rowland de Boys, bearing the tidings that Duke Frederick had been converted by a religious man, and meant to leave the world and all its pomp. He bequeathed his crown to his banished brother, and restored all their lands to the lords who had been exiled with him. In the general chorus of pleasure there was only one discordant note. Jaques the cynic, melancholy Jaques, refused to join in the harmless mirth. He announced his intention of following Duke Frederick into retirement. He bade the others all follow their different forms of enjoyment. As for himself, "I am for other than for dancing measures," he declared.
"Stay, Jaques, stay," begged the Duke.
"Not to see any pastime," was the grim response. "If you want anything, I will stay to hear it at your abandoned cave." Like King Solomon of old, Jaques had tasted all the pleasures of life, and had delighted in studying his own fellow mortals. But his stores of wit and wisdom brought him no real satisfaction. "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity," was all that his worldly philosophy had taught him, and his sharp-eyed cynicism saw only the base and ludicrous side of human nature. So he went his way, rejecting the kindly fellowship that was offered him, and taking a half-exultant pride in his own loneliness and melancholy. But the Duke ordered the rejoicings to proceed, and the green glades of the forest of Arden rang with the sound of song and laughter. End of section 20.
Section 21 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Jason in Panama. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. The Taming of the Shrew, Part 1. A Rough Courtship. Catherine the Cursed! That is not a pretty title for a maiden, but that was the nickname given to one renowned all through Padua for her scolding tongue. Baptista Minola had two daughters, both young and beautiful, but very different in disposition, for while Bianca, the younger, was so sweet and gentle that she was beloved by all, the elder sister Catherine had such a violent and ungovernable temper that everyone feared and disliked her. Bianca had several suitors, but Baptista, her father, was firmly resolved not to allow his youngest daughter to marry until he had secured a husband for the elder. In the meantime he declared Bianca should stay quietly at home, but as he loved his daughter, and did not want the time to pass heavily with her, he promised to provide schoolmasters to instruct her in the studies in which she took most delight, music and poetry. Bianca meekly submitted to this somewhat hard decree, but two of her suitors, Gremio and Hortensio, were very indignant that she should be kept secluded in this fashion. They were rivals in their courtship, but this hindrance to them both made them friends. They agreed to do their best to find a husband for Catherine, and thus, when the younger sister was free again, to set work afresh to see which could win her. On the very day when Baptista announced his resolve, there arrived in Padua a great friend of Hortensio's, whose name was Petruchio, and who lived in Verona. Petruchio told Hortensio that his father was dead, and that he now had come abroad to see the world. He had money in his pockets, possessions at home, and possibly he would marry if he could find a wife. Hortensio's thoughts, of course, at once flew to Katharine, and half in jest he offered to supply Petruchio with a wife, shrewish and ill-favoured, he said, but rich, very rich. "But you are too much my friend," he concluded. "I could not wish you to marry her." Petruchio, in his own way, was as perverse and self-willed as Katharine, and he immediately replied that the lady might be old, ugly, and as great a shrew as Xantippe, wife of Socrates, but so long as she was wealthy he was quite ready to marry her. Seeing his friend in this mood, Hortensio continued in earnest what he had begun in jest. "Petruchio," he said, "I can help you to find a wife, with wealth enough, and who is young and beautiful, and brought up as best becomes a gentlewoman. Her only fault, and that is fault enough, is that she has an intolerable temper, and is so violent and wayward, beyond all measure, that if I were far poorer than I am, I would not wed her for a mine of gold." Petruchio, however, was a gentleman of valiant disposition and most determined will, and he was not in the least daunted by all the reports he heard of Katharine's terrible temper. "Do you think a little noise can frighten me?" he said. "Have I not in my time heard lions roar? Have I not heard the seas puffed up with wind, rage like an angry boar? Have I not heard great ordnance in the field, and heaven's artillery thunder in the skies? Have I not in a pitched battle heard loud alarums, neighing steeds, and trumpets clang, and do you tell me of a woman's tongue? Tush, tush! Frighten boys with bogies." Bianca's suitors were delighted to have found such a match for Katharine, and the lady's father was equally pleased, and promised a handsome dowry, though he was rather doubtful of Petruchio's success in winning his daughter. But it soon turned out Petruchio had not in the least overrated his powers. He knew that kindness and soft words would be thrown away in dealing with such a nature as Katharine's. She was accustomed to everyone's giving in to her, and the very gentleness and submission of Bianca had only the effect of irritating her more. Petruchio determined to adopt an entirely different plan, and to fight Katharine, as it were, with her own weapons. Instead of meekly yielding to all her whims and tantrums, he intended to thwart her on every possible occasion, and if she railed at him, then he would tell her plainly that she sang as sweetly as a nightingale. If she frowned, he would say she looked as clear as morning roses newly washed with dew. If she were mute and would not speak a word, then he would praise her volubility, and say she spoke with piercing eloquence. If she bade him depart, he would thank her as though she bade him remain for a week. If she refused to wed him, he would ask what day he should have the banns called, and when be married. The plan that Petruchio had had the shrewdness to invent he had strength of will to carry out. It was absolutely useless for the fiery lady to try to overawe him by anger, scorn, ridicule, or insolence. Petruchio ignored all her insulting speeches with the most perfect good humour, and his own self-possession and satirical remarks reduced her to a state of hopeless fury. The moment she appeared he started by contradicting her, insisted that she was called Kate, although she said she was called Katharine, and declared that, having heard her mildness praised in every town, her virtues spoken of, and her beauty extolled, he had come to woo her for his wife. It was useless for Katharine to get into a passion and shower abuse on him. The ruder she became, the more charming he pretended to think her. "I find you extremely gentle," he said. "It was told me you were rough and coy and sullen, but now I find report is a liar, for you are pleasant, playful, extremely courteous, a little slow in speech, but sweet as spring flowers. You cannot frown, you cannot look askance, not bite your lip as angry wenches will, nor does it please you to be cross in talk, but you entertain your suitors with gentle conversation, soft and affable." This method of treatment was entirely novel to Katharine, and she scarcely knew how to contain herself at such audacity. But the torrent of angry words she poured out had no effect whatever on this determined suitor. He treated her furious speeches as idle chat, and told her calmly that her father had given his consent, the dowry was agreed on, and that, willing or unwilling, he intended to marry her. The beauty of this fiery maiden took his fancy, and the thought of taming her wild nature to his own will filled him with more pleasure than he would have felt at winning a gentle and submissive creature for his wife. When Baptista a few minutes later entered to ask how the courtship was speeding, Petruchio announced that he and Katharine were so well agreed that they were going to be married on the following Sunday. "I'll see thee hanged on Sunday first," was Katharine's wrathful rejoinder. But all the same, when Sunday arrived, the bride was ready, dressed, and waiting for her eccentric bridegroom. End of Section 21. Section 22 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Jason in Panama. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. The Taming of the Shrew. Part 2. The Marriage and After. The bride was ready, the guests were assembled, but the bridegroom still tarried. Petruchio intended to teach Katharine a severe lesson. She had never shown the slightest consideration for anyone else. Her proud, overbearing nature had always carried everything before it, and her violent temper had quelled any attempt at argument. But in Petruchio she had met her match. It was his aim to humble her pride thoroughly, and to show her how unpleasant it is for others to have to live with a person who is perpetually flying into a passion. The first humiliation to Katharine was the lateness of the bridegroom's arrival, but still more mortifying to her pride, when he did at last appear, was the extraordinary array in which he had chosen to attire himself. His hat was new, but his jerkin was old, and his breeches had been turned 3 times. His boots were not a pair, one was buckled, the other laced, and he had taken out of the town armoury a rusty old sword with a broken hilt. His horse was a poor wretched creature, scarcely able to hobble, and the rotten harness was pieced together with packthread. His servant, Grumio, was equipped in the same fashion, all odds and ends, a linen stocking on one leg and a woollen one on the other, guarded with red and blue list, an old hat with a tattered rag of a feather. In fact, he was a perfect guy in dress, not like a Christian footboy or a gentleman's lackey. Katharine had already started for the church when Petruchio came rushing in, demanding his bride. He declined to give any explanation of his delay, and when Baptista and the other gentlemen begged him to put on more becoming wedding garments, he flatly refused. Kate was to be married to him, and not to his clothes, he declared, and off he hurried to the church. There he behaved in such a strange, mad fashion that the guests were scandalized and the bride was perfectly terrified. He cuffed the clergyman who was marrying them, called for a glass of wine, drank it noisily, and then threw the dregs in the old sexton's face, giving as his only reason that his beard seemed to him thin and hungry. When they got back to the house after the wedding, things went no better. Baptista had prepared a great feast in honour of the occasion, but Petruchio refused to stay and share it, and announced that he must depart at once. Entreaties were of no avail, and even Katharine was refused when she joined her voice to the others. "Nay, then, do what you like," she cried indignantly. "I will not go to-day, nor to-morrow, not till I please myself. The door is open, sir, there lies your way. You had better be moving before your boots grow old. As for me, I shall not go till I please myself. A nice surly husband you are likely to prove, if this is the way you begin." "Oh, Kate, content thee. Prithee, do not be angry." "I will be angry. Father, be quiet. He shall stay my leisure. Gentlemen, forward to the bridal dinner. I see a woman may be made a fool if she has not spirit to resist." "They shall go forward, Kate, at thy command," said Petruchio. Obey the bride, that you attend on her, go to the feast, revel, be mad and merry, or go hang yourselves, but as for my bonny Kate, she must go with me. Nay, look not big, nor stamp, nor stare, nor fret. I will be master of what is mine own. She is my goods, my chattels, my everything, and here she stands, touch her whoever dare. Fear not, sweet wife, they shall not touch thee, Kate." And, making belief that they were beset with thieves, Petruchio shouted to his manservant Grumio to come and help rescue his mistress, and so dragged Katharine reluctantly away. The wedding journey was unpleasant. Katharine's horse fell with her in one of the muddiest places, and Petruchio left her to struggle free by herself, while he belaboured Grumio heartily because her horse had stumbled. Katharine had to wade through the mire to pray for mercy for the man before her husband would leave off beating him. Arrived at his country house, Petruchio had all the other servants assembled, and then stormed at them roundly because nothing was right. Katharine had again to intercede, and she tried to point out that they were not to blame, but the angry master would listen to no excuses. Supper was brought, but Petruchio pretended it was badly cooked, and threw the meat about all over the place, refusing to let his wife taste a morsel. She was now really hungry, and would gladly have eaten the food he threw away. But Petruchio intended that she should be much more hungry and submissive before he allowed her anything to eat. She was also very tired, but he took care she should get no sleep that night. He tossed about the furniture in the room, finding fault with everything, and all this was done with the pretence that it was out of loving care for her own comfort. By the following day Katharine felt almost famished. She implored Grumio to go and fetch her something to eat. She did not mind what it was so long as it was wholesome food. The man tantalized her for some time by suggesting one dish after another, any one of which she would gladly have accepted, and finally ended by saying impertinently he could fetch her some mustard without any beef. At that moment Petruchio entered, bringing some meat which he said he had himself prepared for her. "I am sure, sweet Kate, this kindness merits thanks. What? Not a word? Nay, then, you do not like it, and all my pains are of no use. Here, take away this dish." "I pray you let it stand," said Katharine. "The poorest service is repaid with thanks, and so shall mine be before you touch the meat," said Petruchio. "I thank you, sir," Katharine compelled her proud lips to murmur, for indeed she was nearly starving, and could not endure to see the food carried away untouched. "Now, my honey love," continued Petruchio, who was always most affectionate in his speech, and pretended that everything he did was out of devotion to his wife, "we will return to your father's house, decked out as bravely as the best, in gay apparel." And, scarcely allowing her a moment in which to snatch a morsel of food, he ordered in the tailor and haberdasher, who had been preparing some fine new clothes. But, as usual, nothing pleased him. "Here is the cap your worship bespoke," said the haberdasher. "Why, this was moulded on a porringer, a velvet dish!" exclaimed Petruchio with an air of disgust. "It's a cockle or a walnut shell. A toy! A baby's cap! Away with it! Come, let me have a bigger." "I'll have no bigger," declared Katharine. "This suits the present style, and gentlewomen wear such caps as these." "When you are gentle you shall have one too, and not till then," said Petruchio, in rather a meaning voice. Katharine's old spirit blazed up again at this rebuke, but the only notice Petruchio took of her angry words was to pretend to think she was agreeing with him in his abuse of the cap. Then he ordered the tailor to produce the gown. "Oh, heavens, what silly style of fluff is here?" he cried in horror. "What's this? A sleeve? It's like a demi-cannon. What, up and down, carved like an apple tart? Here's snip and nip, and cut and slish and slash, like a censer in a barber's shop. Why, what in the name of evil, tailor, do you call this?" "You bade me make it well and properly according to the fashion and the time," said the tailor. "Marry, so I did, but, if you remember, I did not bid you mar it to the time. Come, be off, I'll none of it. Hence, make the best of it you can." "I never saw a better fashioned gown," said Katharine. More quaint, more pleasing, nor more praiseworthy? I suppose you mean to make a puppet of me." "Why, true, he means to make a puppet of you," said Petruchio, wilfully mistaking to whom she spoke. "She says your worship means to make a puppet of her," explained the tailor. But Petruchio would listen to no reason or argument, and sent the tailor away in the most peremptory manner, though privately the man was told he would be paid for the gown, and that he was not to be offended at Petruchio's hasty words. "Well, come, my Kate, we will go to your father's house even in this honest mean raiment," said Petruchio. "After all, fine clothes are of no importance. Is the jay more precious than the lark because his feathers are more beautiful? Oh no, good Kate, neither are you any the worse for this mean array. If you feel ashamed about it, lay the blame on me, and so be cheerful. Come, we will go at once to feast and amuse ourselves at your father's house. Let me see, I think it is now about 7 o'clock. We shall easily get there by dinner time." Katharine looked at her husband in astonishment, and well she might, for it was already the middle of the day. "I assure you, sir, it is almost 2 o'clock. It will be supper time before we get there." "It shall be 7 o'clock before I get to horse," declared Petruchio. "Look, whatever I speak or do, or think to do, you are always crossing me. I will not go to day, and before I do, it shall be whatever time I say it is." Petruchio's determined will at last gained the day, and Katharine learned that it was useless to attempt to battle with him. When in their journey to her father's house he chose to say it was the moon shining in the sky, she had to agree that it was the moon, although everyone could see it was the sun; and then when he declared immediately that it was the blessed sun, she had also to change her statement and say that it was the sun. "What you will have it named, even that it is," she said, quite tired out by his strange freaks, "and so it shall be so for Katharine." "Petruchio, go your way, the field is won," said his friend Hortensio, who was with them. When matters had come to this point with the haughty Katharine, there was not much fear that she would resume her old imperious ways. It may be remembered that, when Katharine's father ordered his younger daughter Bianca to keep in seclusion till a husband had been found for Katharine, he had provided schoolmasters to divert her tedious hours. Two of her suitors had contrived to get into the house under the guise of masters of music and poetry, and one of them, Lucentio, she presently married, while the other, Hortensio, found consolation in a wealthy widow. To the wedding feast came Petruchio and Katharine, Hortensio and his wife, with many other guests, and during the meal a rather hot discussion sprang up as to the amiability of some of the ladies present. Petruchio remarked that his friend Hortensio was afraid of his wife, whereupon that lady retorted that he who is giddy thinks the world goes round, meaning by this that Petruchio was afraid of his own wife. Katharine was indignant at this, and even the gentle Bianca plunged rather sharply into the argument. After the ladies had retired from the table the gentlemen still continued the discussion. Petruchio said the jest had glanced away from him, and had probably hurt Lucentio and Hortensio worse. "Now, in good sadness, son Petruchio," said Baptista, "I think you have the veriest shrew of all." "Well, I say no," said Petruchio, "so to make sure, let each one of us send to his wife, and he whose wife is most obedient to come at once when he sends for her shall win the wager which we propose." "Content," said Hortensio. "What is the wager?" 20 crowns," suggested Lucentio. 20 crowns!" cried Petruchio. "I'd venture as much on my hawk or my hound, but 20 times as much on my wife." "100, then," said Lucentio. "A match. It's done," said Petruchio. "Who shall begin?" asked Hortensio. "I will," said Lucentio. So a message was first sent to Bianca, but she sent back word that she was busy and could not come. "How? She is busy and she cannot come? Is that an answer?" said Petruchio mockingly. "Ay, and a kind one too," said one of the guests. "Pray heaven, sir, your wife do not send you a worse." "I hope better," replied Petruchio. "Signor Biondello, go and entreat my wife to come to me forthwith," said Hortensio. "Oh ho! Entreat her!" laughed Petruchio. "Nay, then, she must needs come." I am afraid, sir, do what you can, yours will not be entreated," retorted Hortensio. Then, as the messenger returned, "Now where's my wife?" "She says you have some goodly jest in hand; she will not come. She bids you go to her." "Worse and worse, she will not come," said Petruchio. "Intolerable! Not to be endured! Grumio, go to your mistress. Say I command her to come to me." "I know her answer," said Hortensio. "What?" "She will not come." But the next moment in walked Katharine. "What is your will, sir, that you send for me?" "Where is your sister and Hortensio's wife?" asked Petruchio. "They are sitting talking by the parlour fire." "Go fetch them hither. If they refuse to come, beat them forth to their husbands. Away, I say, and bring them straight here." "Here is a wonder if you talk of a wonder," said Lucentio, as Katharine obediently departed. "And so it is. I wonder what it bodes," said Hortensio. "Marry, peace it bodes, and love, and quiet life; in short, everything that is sweet and happy," said Petruchio. "Now, fair befall you, good Petruchio," said Baptista. "You have won the wager, and I will add to it 20,000 crowns. Another dowry to another daughter, for Katharine is changed as if she had never been." "Nay," said Petruchio, "I will win my wager better yet, and show more signs of her obedience. See where she comes and brings your forward wives as prisoners to her womanly persuasion." Then, as Katharine entered with Bianca and Hortensio's wife, he continued, "Katharine, that cap of yours does not become you. Off with that bauble, throw it under foot." Greatly to the disgust of the other two wives, Katharine instantly obeyed. "Lord, let me never have a cause to sigh till I be brought to such a silly pass," said Hortensio's wife, and even the gentle Bianca exclaimed with equal disdain, "Fie, what sort of foolish duty do you call this?" "I wish your duty were as foolish too," said her husband. "The wisdom of your duty, fair Bianca, has cost me 100 crowns since supper time." "The more fool you for wagering on my duty," was Bianca's unkind reply. Then Petruchio bade Katharine tell the other headstrong women what duty they owed their husbands, and this she straightway did, in a speech of such wonderful grace and submission that all her hearers were amazed. As for her husband, he was delighted with the result of his somewhat rough schooling. "Come, Kate," he said, "good night," and he retired triumphantly with his now loving and devoted wife. End of Section 22.
Section 23 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Macleod. www.rsvo.ca. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. Chapter 23. Twelfth Night. Part 1. Orsino's Envoy. Sebastian and Viola were brother and sister, twins, and they resembled each other so closely that it would have been impossible to know them apart if it had not been for the difference in dress. Travelling by sea on one occasion, they met with a dangerous adventure, for near the coast of Illyria their ship was wrecked, and though both managed to get safely to land, each feared the other had perished. The captain of the ship, who was saved in the same boat with Viola, kindly befriended her. It happened he knew that country well, for he was born and bred there, and had only left it a month before. He told Viola that it was governed by a duke, noble in nature as in name, and that this duke was in love with a fair lady called Olivia. The father and brother of the lady, however, had both died within the last year, and the Countess Olivia, out of love for them and grief for their loss, had shut herself up in seclusion ever since, and refused to see anyone. Viola, who had been cast quite destitute on shore, would gladly have served this lady for a while, till the opportunity came to show what was her real estate in life. But the captain said that would be difficult to manage, for the Countess would listen to no kind of suit, not even the Duke Orsino's. Then the idea came to Viola to disguise herself as a page, and to seek service with the Duke, of whom she had heard her own father speak. She could sing and play to him in many sorts of music, which would make her well worth his service, for the Duke was especially fond of music. The captain promised to keep concealed who she really was, aid her in getting a disguise, and present her to the Duke. All went well. Viola, with her grace, beauty, and noble bearing, made such a gallant young page that she was received into instant favour, and before 3 days were over, the Duke, won by some irresistible charm, had confided to Cesario, as he called her, all the secret of his unhappy love for the Lady Olivia. His suit so far had been rejected. Even his messengers were denied admittance. But it occurred to Orsino that if he sent this pretty lad to the Countess, perhaps he might be more successful in pleading his cause than some older envoy of graver aspect. He bade Cesario insist on admittance, and refused to be sent away without seeing Olivia. When he gained speech with the Countess, he was to tell her of Orsino's devotion, and relate his woes. "Prosper well in this," he ended, "and you shall live as freely as your lord, and call his fortunes yours." Alas, poor Viola! The Duke little thought what a task he was setting his young page. The sweetness and charm of his own nature had already won Viola's heart, and how gladly she would have accepted the love which Olivia rejected. But she must be faithful to her trust. "I'll do my best to woo your lady," she said, and so departed on her mission. While the Lady Olivia lived in grief and retirement, there were others of her household very far from sharing in her desire for quiet and gravity. Her steward, Malvolio, was indeed a staid and respectable personage, stiff in bearing, hating all forms of wit and levity, very fault-finding with others, and extremely well satisfied with himself. Olivia had a real esteem for Malvolio, for she knew him to be worthy and conscientious, although, as she told him, he was sick of self-love. But there were others who conducted themselves very differently from Malvolio, and between these noisy dependents and the austere steward there was a constant smouldering resentment, always ready to break into open warfare. The chief source of unruliness was a certain riotous knight, called Sir Toby Belch, an uncle of Olivia's, who since her brother's death had taken up his abode in the house. He loved feasting and revelry, and his wild behaviour was likely soon to bring discredit on the household, if some check were not put to it. His boon companion was an idle knight, called Sir Andrew Aguecheek, who, under a smattering of foreign languages, concealed an unlimited fund of native stupidity. Sir Toby was quite aware of Sir Andrew's silliness, and loved to laugh at him and parade his folly. But none the less, he thought this foolish gentleman would do very well as a husband for Olivia, and he encouraged him to come to the house on every occasion. A third member of the band was Feste, the clown or jester. Feste was a privileged person, and, like all fools or court jesters in those days, was allowed to speak his mind much more freely than ordinary mortals. Even the stately Countess herself did not escape his sharp speeches. In days gone by, Olivia's father had taken much delight in him, and now Olivia listened indulgently to his chatter, and rebuked Malvolio for the sour ill temper with which he tried to snub the fool's sallies. In addition to his fool's wit, Feste possessed a gift of real power, a wonderfully sweet voice for singing, and wherever he went he could be heard snatches of song, gay and jocund, or plaintive and of touching pathos. Olivia's waiting-maid, Maria, regarded Malvolio with no more favour than did the rest of this noisy company. She was a quick-witted, lively young person, delighting in fun, and Malvolio's solemn primness and rigid severity seemed to her nothing but hypocrisy. "An affected ass," she described him, with small reverence. with the best possible opinion of himself, so crammed, as he thinks, with excellences that he firmly believes that all who look on him love him. And it was from this intense self-conceit of Malvolio's that this mischievous little band of conspirators, Sir Toby Belch, Sir Andrew Aguecheek, Feste the Clown, and Maria, found means to revenge themselves by playing a humiliating trick on the pompous steward. When Viola, in the character of Cesario, reached Olivia's house, she was at first refused admittance. But as she announced her intention of standing at the door until she had given her message, and absolutely declined to take any denial, Olivia at last consented to see her. "Give me my veil," she said to Maria. "Come, throw it over my face. We will once more hear Orsino's embassy." And Viola, attended by 4 or 5 servants of the Duke, was ushered into her presence. "The honourable lady of the house, which is she?" she demanded. "Speak to me, I shall answer for her. Your will?" said Olivia curtly. "Most radiant, exquisite, and unmatchable beauty," began Viola, with high-flown gallantry and enjoying the humour of her own words. For as Olivia was closely veiled, she could not see whom she was addressing. Not in the least abashed, however, by the lady's stately dignity, she begged permission to deliver her message, and to speak it to Olivia alone. The quaint impertinence of the pretty lad, his ready wit, and his noble bearing took Olivia's fancy, and instead of dismissing him abruptly, as had been her first intention, she sent away her attendants and bade him speak on. But when Viola uttered Orsino's name, Olivia, as usual, drew back. Even from this messenger she had no wish to hear of Orsino's devotion, and she checked him rather abruptly. "Have you no more to say?" she added. "Good madam, let me see your face," pleaded Viola, for she longed to behold the lady who could so enchant Duke Orsino. "Have you any commission from your lord to see my face?" asked Olivia, not ill-pleased. "You are now out of your message, but we will draw the curtain and show you the picture. Look you, sir, such a one I am now. Is it not well done?" She threw back her veil, and her dazzling beauty shone forth in all its radiance. Viola gazed at her in admiration. "Excellently done, if God did all," she murmured, for she could scarcely believe such loveliness of tint could be natural. "'Tis in grain, sir. It will endure wind and weather," replied Olivia. "It is beauty truly blent, whose red and white were laid on by nature's own sweet and cunning hand," said Viola. "Lady, you are the cruelest person alive if you let these graces go down to the grave and leave the world no copy." "Oh, sir, I will not be so hard-hearted," said Olivia with gentle sarcasm. "I will give out divers schedules of my beauty. It shall be all entered in an inventory, and duly labelled. As item, 2 lips, indifferent red. Item, 2 grey eyes with lids to them. Item, 1 neck, 1 chin, and so forth. Were you sent hither to praise me?" "I see you what you are. You are too proud," said Viola. "My lord and master loves you. Oh, such love deserves its recompense, though you were crowned peerless in beauty." To this Olivia replied that Orsino knew her mind. She could not love him. She knew him to be noble, of great estate and stainless youth, generous in disposition, learned, valiant, graceful, and handsome in person. Yet she could not love him. He might have taken his answer long ago. "If I loved you as my master does, with such fire and suffering, I would find no sense in your denial," said Viola. "I would not understand it." "Why? What would you do?" "Make me a willow cabin at your gate, write loyal songs of love, and sing them loud, even in the dead of night," cried Viola. "Call out your name to the echoing hills, and make the babbling air cry out, 'Olivia!' Oh, you should have no rest, but you should pity me." "You might do much," said Olivia with assumed sarcasm. but really touched by the young page's enthusiasm. "What is your parentage?" "Above my fortunes, yet my estate is good." "Get you to your lord. I cannot love him. Let him send no more, unless, perchance, you come to me again to tell me how he takes it. Fare you well. I thank you for your pains. Spend this for me." "I am no feed-post, lady. Keep your purse," said Viola. "My master, not myself, lacks recompense. When your turn comes to love, may your own lover's heart be made of flint, and may your affection, like my master's, be held in contempt. Farewell, fair cruelty." Viola had done her best for her master, but the only success she had was to win his lady's heart for herself. The stately Lady Olivia, so cold and proud to the noble Duke Orsino, was now forced to own to herself that she found a strange fascination in this young page. He had refused the gift of money which, in accordance with the custom of those times, Olivia had offered. But she could not let him pass out of her sight, perhaps forever, without a remembrance. "What ho, Malvolio!" she called. "Here, madam, at your service. Run after that same peevish messenger. The Duke Orsino's man," she said. "He left this ring behind him. Tell him I'll none of it. Desire him not to flatter his lord, nor feed him up with hope. I will never marry him. If the youth will come this way tomorrow, I'll give him reasons for it. Hasten, Malvolio." "Madam, I will," said the steward, and he stiffly departed and ungraciously fulfilled his errand. Viola had given no ring to Olivia, and she could not fail to see that the Countess intended this gift as a mark of favour, and had taken a great liking for herself. This was anything but pleasing to her, for she knew it could lead to nothing but fresh trouble. "Poor lady! She had better love a dream," she thought. "How will matters turn out? My master loves her dearly. I, poor fool, am just as fond of him. And she, mistaken, seems to dote on me. What will become of this? Oh, time, you must untangle it, not I. It is too hard a knot for me to unravel." End of section 23. Section 24 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Macleod. www.rsvo.ca. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. Chapter 24. Twelfth Night. Part 2. A Dream of Greatness. The disagreement always existing between the steward Malvolio and the riotous members of Olivia's household broke at last into warfare. On the night of the day when Duke Orsino's messenger came to Olivia, Sir Toby and Sir Andrew chose to sit up late, drinking and singing. Feste the clown joined them, and after one song sung sweetly enough by himself, the whole trio united in yelling out a noisy catch. The din they made roused the household, and Maria came hurrying in to beg them to be quiet. "Why, what a caterwauling you keep here!" she cried. "If my lady have not called up her steward Malvolio, and bade him turn you out of doors, never trust me." But all her attempts to silence them were useless. They laughed, shouted, called for more wine, and went on singing at the pitch of their voices. In vain she begged for peace, and they were quite beyond control. When Malvolio himself appeared, they paid no more heed to him than they had done to Maria, and only answered his rebuking words by each singing at him in turn snatches of different songs. "My masters, are you mad, or what are you?" he cried with just indignation. "Have you no wit, manners, nor honesty, but to gabble like tinkers at this time of night? Do you make an alehouse of my lady's house, that you squeak out your vulgar catches at the top of your voice? Is there no respect of place, persons, nor time in you?" "We did keep time, sir, in our catches," said Sir Toby. Shut up. Sir Toby, I must be round with you. My lady bade me tell you that, though she harbours you as her kinsman, she is not allied to your bad behaviour. If you can separate yourself from your misdoings, you are welcome to the house. If not, it would please you to take leave of her. She is very willing to bid you farewell. Farewell, dear heart, since I must needs be gone, trolled out Sir Toby in mock melancholy, and not in the least impressed by Malvolio's stern rebuke. Nay, good Sir Toby, pleaded Maria. His eyes do show his days are almost done, chimed in the clown, carrying on the song. All Malvolio's angry speeches were met with the same musical mockery, and nothing would make the culprit stop. Almost speechless with fury, Malvolio left the revellers, declaring that his lady should know of their goings-on. Sweet Sir Toby, be patient for tonight, urged Maria. Since the youth of Duke Orsino's was today with my lady, she is much disquieted. For Monsieur Malvolio, let me alone with him. If I do not gull him into a byword and make him a general laughing-stock, never trust my wit. I know I can do it. Good, good. Tell us something about him, said Sir Toby. Mary, sir, sometimes he is kind of a Puritan, said Maria. Oh, if I thought that, I'd beat him like a dog, cried the silly Sir Andrew. What, for being a Puritan? Asked Sir Toby, who was always ready to ridicule Sir Andrew's brainless remarks, though he made such a companion of him. Thy exquisite reason, dear knight. I have no exquisite reason for it, but I have reason good enough, said the foolish young man sulkily. Maria then went on to say that Malvolio's self-conceit as to his own merits was so great that he imagined everyone who looked at him loved him, and this would give them an opening for their revenge. She would drop in his way some vaguely expressed letters of love, in which he would find his different particularities so well described that there could be no doubt as to whom was meant. She could write very like the Lady Olivia. In fact, they sometimes could not tell their own handwritings apart. Malvolio would think the letters he found came from Olivia, and that she was in love with him. Maria's trick was not a very praiseworthy one, but her hearers were not troubled with scruples. They only thought how delightfully comic it would be to see the stiff and starched steward priding himself on the conquest he had made, and what deep humiliation would fall on him when his mistake was discovered. Maria was not long in carrying out her scheme, and Malvolio was immediately caught with the bait. Having once got into his mind the absurd idea that the Countess Olivia was in love with him, he began weaving plans of what he should do when he was advanced to the high position of her husband. His ambitious meditations were overheard by the conspirators, for Maria had run into the garden to warn them of his approach. "Get all three into the box-tree," she cried. "Malvolio is coming down this walk. He has been yonder in the sun practising behaviour to his own shadow this half-hour. Observe him, for the love of mockery, for I know this letter will make an idiot of him. Hide in the name of jesting. Lie thou there," she added, throwing down a letter, "for here comes the trout that must be caught with tickling." "It is but fortune, all is fortune," murmured Malvolio, as he paced along with solemn stride. "Maria once told me that she liked me, and I have heard herself go so far as to say that if ever she fancied anyone, it should be one of my complexion. Besides, she treats me with more exalted respect than anyone else of her followers. What should I think of it?" Malvolio's imagination now soared beyond all bounds, and he marched up and down, pluming himself like a turkey-cock. "To be Count Malvolio!" he exclaimed in ecstasy, and forthwith began to consider how he should comport himself in that exalted sphere. "Having been 3 months married to her, sitting in my state," he mused, gesticulating to himself as if all he described were really taking place, "calling my officers about me in my branched velvet gown, and telling them I knew my place, as I wish they should know theirs. I would ask for my kinsman Toby. 7 of my people with an obedient start make for him. I frown the while, and perchance wind up my watch, or play with my some rich jewel. Toby approaches, bows humbly to me. "Shall this fellow live?" cried the exasperated real Sir Toby in the box-tree. I extend my hand to him thus, quenching my familiar smile with an austere regard of control. "And does not Toby give you a blow on the lips, then?" fumed the hearer, saying, "Cousin Toby, my fortunes having cast me on your niece, give me this privilege of speech. You must amend your drinking habits. Besides, you waste the treasure of your time with a foolish knight." "That's me, I warrant you," put in Sir Andrew. One Sir Andrew. "I knew it was I, for many call me fool," said Sir Andrew, quite pleased at his own penetration. But Malvolio's imaginary rebuke to Sir Toby came abruptly to an end, for he now caught sight of the letter which Maria had thrown on the ground. "What have we here? By my life, this is my lady's hand. These are her very C's, her U's, and her T's. And thus she makes her great P's. Beyond all question it is her hand." Then Malvolio read aloud the inscription: "To the unknown beloved, this and my good wishes." Her very phrases, by your leave, wax soft, and the impression her own seal. It is my lady. To whom should this be? The letter was written in the most nonsensical terms, but Malvolio at once began to puzzle a meaning into it. "Jove knows I love, but who? Lips do not move. No man must know." "No man must know," he echoed. "If this should be thee, Malvolio!" "I may command where I adore, but silence, like a Lucrece knife, with bloodless stroke my heart doth gore. M-O-A-I doth sway my life." Malvolio pondered deeply over these mystic lines. "I may command where I adore" was of course quite simple. Olivia might command him, for he was her servant. But what about the letters? M-O-A-I. M. Malvolio. M. Why, that begins my name, came the sudden flash of discovery. The succeeding letters were not so easy to explain, for they did not follow in their proper order. But Malvolio was not discouraged. He had at least the satisfaction of knowing that every one of these letters was in his name. "Soft, there follows prose," he continued. "If this fall into thy hands, reflect," ran the absurd epistle. "In my stars I am above thee, but be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. Thy fates open their hands, and to accustom thyself to what thou art likely to be, throw off thy humble shell, and appear afresh. Be opposite with a kinsman, surly with servants. Let thy tongue tang arguments of state, put thyself into the trick of singularity. She thus advises thee that sighs for thee. Remember who commended thy yellow stockings and wished to see thee ever cross-gartered. I say remember. Go to, thou art made, if thou desirest to be so. If not, let me see thee a steward still, the fellow of servants, and not worthy to touch fortune's fingers. Farewell, she that would alter services with thee. The fortunate unhappy." There was also a postscript, which said, "Thou canst not choose but know who I am. If thou entertainest my love, let it appear in thy smiling. Thy smiles become thee well. Therefore in my presence still smile, dear my sweet, I prithee." This ridiculous letter quite turned poor Malvolio's head. he never doubted but that Olivia had really written it, he resolved in rapture to do everything he was bidden, and hurried away to put on as quickly as possible the yellow stockings and cross-garters. Maria was delighted with the success of her trick, for all the things she had commended to a Malvolio were that Olivia especially disliked. He will come to my lady in yellow stockings, and it is a colour she abhors, she cried gleefully, and cross-gartered, a fashion she detests. And he will smile upon her, which will now be so unsuitable to her disposition, being addicted to melancholy as she is, that it cannot but turn him into great contempt. And away went Maria and the others to see the first approach of the deluded Malvolio in his extraordinary new guise before his lady. End of section 24. Section 25 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Macleod. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. 12th Night, Part 3. The Challenge. When Viola, saved from the wreck, was grieving over the supposed loss of her brother, she was comforted by the sea captain, who told her that he had seen Sebastian bind himself to a strong mast, which floated on the sea, and that probably he too had been saved. This turned out to be really the case. Sebastian was picked up by another ship, the captain of which, Antonio by name, most kindly befriended the destitute young stranger. For 3 months he kept Sebastian with him, and he loved the boy so dearly that when Sebastian left him to go to the court of Orsino, Antonio followed him to Illyria, fearing lest some harm should come to him. Antonio dared not show himself openly in Illyria, for several years before he had fought valiantly on the side of the enemies of Orsino, and done much damage to the Duke's fleet. When on their arrival, therefore, Sebastian proposed to take a walk to see anything of note in the city, Antonio replied that it would be better for himself to go and secure a lodging and order food to be prepared. He knew of a place that would suit very well, the Elephant Inn, in the south suburbs of the city. Sebastian, in the meanwhile, could go for a walk and join him in about an hour's time. Knowing that Sebastian had no money or very little, Antonio further insisted on giving him his purse, in case he should see any trifle he wished to purchase. Everything being thus arranged, they parted, Antonio to go to the Elephant Inn, and Sebastian to take a walk through the town. In the palace of the Duke, there was still sadness, for the young page Cesario, in spite of his kind reception by the Countess Olivia, had brought back no more cheering answer than former envoys. Weary at heart, Orsino longed to hear some soothing music, and he called for a touching little song which he had heard sung the night before. A plaintive, old-world ditty, whose quaint sadness and simplicity had more power to relieve his sorrow than the more light and cheerful strains of modern music. His servants told him that the person who had sung the song was Feste the jester, who had been in the service of the Countess Olivia's father, and, as he was still about the house, Orsino ordered him to be fetched. So Feste came, and this was the song he sang. Come away, death, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, breath, I am slain by a fair cruel maid. My shroud of white, stuck all with you, oh, prepare it. My part of death, no one so true did share it. Not a flower sweet, on my black coffin let there be strown. Not a friend greet my poor corpse where my bones shall be strown. 1,000 sighs to save, lay me, oh, where sad true lover never find my grave, to weep there. This sad little song just suited the melancholy mood of the Duke, and when Feste had sung it and gone away, Orsino went on talking to Viola, or his young page Cesario, as he thought her, about his unhappy love for Olivia. He bade her go once more to the cruel lady, and insist on her listening to him. "But if she cannot love you, sir," said Viola. "I cannot be answered so," said Orsino. "Sooth, but you must," replied Viola. "Say that some lady, as perhaps there is, has a great a love for you as you have for Olivia. You cannot love her. You tell her so. Must she not then be answered?" Orsino replied that no woman could ever love any man as he loved Olivia, that women's hearts were much more shallow than men's, etc. Viola, knowing her own deep and hidden affection for the Duke himself, protested that she knew too well how much women could love, and in veiled language she went on to describe the case of a daughter of her father, whom Orsino naturally took to mean a sister, but who was in reality herself. However, in the end of it was that Viola again went to Olivia. She was received just as kindly as before, but Olivia said plainly that it was quite useless for her to plead on behalf of Orsino, although if Cesario would undertake another suit, she would listen to it more gladly than to the music of the spheres. Viola could only reply to this as she had done before, that she had one heart, and that no woman except herself should ever be mistress of it. So she took her leave. The interview between the Countess and the young page had been jealously watched. The spectator was the foolish knight, Sir Andrew Aguecheek. It had occurred to Sir Toby that it would be a very good plan to wed his niece Olivia to this silly gentleman, and he kept urging Sir Andrew to pay his court to her. Sir Andrew spent money lavishly in riotous living with Sir Toby, hoping to repay himself when he married Olivia. He was therefore very indignant when he saw her bestow more favours on Orsino's messenger than she had ever done on him, and he angrily told Sir Toby that he intended to leave at once. Sir Toby tried to soothe him, and he and another gentleman of Olivia's household, who happened to be present, persuaded him that Olivia knew all the time that he was looking on, and only showed favour to the youth to exasperate Sir Andrew, and to awaken his dormouse valour. They said he ought immediately to have fired up and frightened the boy into dumbness, and that he had damaged his own cause by not doing so. The only thing now to do was to redeem it by some laudable attempt either of valour or policy. "If it is to be any way, it must be with valour, for policy I hate," said Sir Andrew. "Why then build your fortunes on the basis of valour," said Sir Toby in his loud, jovial voice. "Challenge the youth to fight, hurt him in 11 places. My niece shall take note of it, and be assured nothing prevails more to win a man favour with a woman than a report of valour. There is no way but this, Sir Andrew," added Fabian. "Will either of you bear a challenge to him from me?" asked Sir Andrew. "Go, write it in a martial hand," said Sir Toby. "Be sharp and brief. Make it as rude and insolent as you possibly can." Sir Andrew retired to write his challenge, leaving the other 2 men to laugh heartily over the prospect of a good joke. "We shall have a rare letter from him," said Fabian, "but you will not deliver it." "Faith, and I will," exclaimed Sir Toby, "and by all means stir on the youth to an answer. I think oxen and cart ropes will not drag them together." For he knew Sir Andrew had not a grain of courage in his whole body, and as for Orsino's page, he looked far too soft and gentle to be in the least brave or daring. Sir Andrew wrote his challenge, but when finished it was such an extraordinary production that Sir Toby decided not to deliver it. "The behaviour of the young gentleman," he said, "shows him to be of good capacity and breeding. Therefore this letter, being so excellently ignorant, will not terrify him in the least. He will know it comes from a clodpole." I will deliver his challenge by word of mouth, give a notable report of Aguecheek's valor, and drive the gentleman, who is so young I know he will readily believe it, into a most hideous opinion of his rage, skill, fury, and impetuosity. This will so frighten them both that they will kill each other by the look, like cockatrices." What Sir Toby had planned came to pass, and he and Fabian were soon hugely enjoying the success of their joke. They first found Viola, and delivered Sir Andrew's challenge, assuring her that he was terribly incensed and was a most dangerous adversary. "If you hold your life at any price, betake you to your guard," counselled Sir Toby, "for your opponent has everything that youth, strength, skill, and wrath can furnish a man with." Poor Viola was in the greatest alarm on hearing of the encounter that awaited her. She would gladly have wriggled out of it if she could. But Sir Toby would listen to no excuses. "I will return again to the house and desire some escort of the lady," said Viola. "I am no fighter." But Sir Toby insisted that she positively must fight with Sir Andrew, and that he had real ground of injury, and that if she declined to fight with him, she would have to fight with himself, which would be just as dangerous. "This is as uncivil as strange," said poor Viola, inwardly quaking with terror. "I beseech you, do me the courtesy to find out from the knight what my offence is. It must be some oversight on my part. Certainly I have done nothing on purpose." "I will do so," said Sir Toby. "Signor Fabian, stay with this gentleman till my return." Sir Toby went off in search of Sir Andrew, to whom he proceeded to give the most glowing account of the young page's furious disposition and his marvellous skill in fencing. Sir Andrew was in a perfect agony of fear. "If I had thought he had been valiant and so cunning in fence, I would have seen him hanged before I would have challenged him," he cried miserably. "Let him let the matter slip, and will give him my horse, Grey Capilet." "I will suggest it to him," said Sir Toby. "Stand here, make a good show of it, and this shall end without loss of life." Then, with a chuckle to himself, "Marry, I'll ride your horse as well as I ride you. I have his horse to take up the quarrel." He added in a low voice to Fabian, "I have persuaded him the youth is a fury." "He thinks just as horribly of Sir Andrew," laughed back Fabian, "and pants and looks pale, as if a bear were at his heels." "There is no remedy, sir. He will fight with you, because of his oath," announced Sir Toby to Viola. "He has thought better of his quarrel, and finds now that it is scarcely worth talking of. Therefore draw. For the sake of his vow, he protests he will not hurt you." "Pray heaven defend me," murmured Viola aside. "A little thing would make me tell him how much I lack of a man." "Give ground if you see him furious," advised Fabian, apart to Viola. "Come, Sir Andrew, there is no remedy," said Sir Toby aside to the other trembling combatant. "The gentleman will, for his honour's sake, have one bout with you. He cannot, by the laws of duelling, avoid it. But he has promised me, as he is a gentleman and a soldier, he will not hurt you. Come on, begin." "Pray heaven he keep his oath," murmured Sir Andrew. "I do assure you it is against my will," said Viola piteously. The two unhappy champions then reluctantly allowed themselves to be almost dragged into position by their determined seconds, who had much ado to prevent them both ignominiously taking to their heels. It would be difficult to say which was in the most abject state of fear. Sir Andrew was quaking in every limb, and Viola turned quite pale at the sight of her own sword. But before their shaking weapons managed to meet, there came an interruption. Antonio, the sea captain, passed that way, and seeing Viola, he thought it was Sebastian, for in her page's dress, Viola had copied her brother in every particular. Ever careful for Sebastian's safety, Antonio at once interfered. "Put up your sword," he said to Sir Andrew. "If this young gentleman has offended you in any way, I take the fault on me. If you offended him, I will fight you for him." "You, sir? Why, what are you?" demanded Sir Toby, not at all pleased to have his joke spoilt in this fashion. "One, sir, who for his love dares yet do more than you have heard him brag to you he will," said Antonio proudly. "Nay, if you are a boaster, I am for you," said Sir Toby, who, with all his faults, was no coward. The swords clashed in a good earnest this time, but again there came an interruption. Some officers arrived who proceeded to arrest Antonio at the suit of Duke Orsino. He had been seen and recognized as an ancient enemy. There was no escape. "This comes with seeking you," said Antonio to Viola, whom he took for Sebastian. "But there is no remedy. I shall answer it. What will you do now that my necessity makes me ask you for my purse? I am much more grieved for what I am prevented doing for you than for anything that befalls myself. You stand amazed, but be comforted." "Come, sir, away," said one of the officers, as Viola stood staring in astonishment at Antonio. Of course she did not know in her least what he meant, for she had never seen him before in her life. "I must entreat of you some of that money," pleaded Antonio. "What money, sir?" asked Viola. "Because of the kindness you have shown me here, and partly prompted by your present trouble, I will lend you something out of my own very small means. I have not much. I will divide with you what I have. Hold, there is half my purse." Antonio was deeply wounded by such apparent ingratitude from one for whom he had done so much. He was reluctant to proclaim his own good deeds, but when Viola persisted in declaring she did not know him, he could not help relating how he had saved the youth from shipwreck and what devotion he had lavished on him afterwards. In telling this, he called him by his name, as he thought, Sebastian, but he was hurried away by the officers before Viola had time to answer. This name Sebastian filled her with sudden hope. She knew how closely she resembled her brother, and she had imitated the same fashion, color, and ornament which he was accustomed to wear. Perhaps, then, the tempests had been kind, and Sebastian was really saved. A very dishonest, paltry boy, and more a coward than a hare, was Sir Toby's disgusted comment as Viola walked off. His dishonesty appears in leaving his friend here in necessity and denying him, and for his cowardice. Ask Fabian. "A coward, a most devout coward," agreed Fabian. "Ha! I'll after him again and beat him," said the valiant Sir Andrew. "Do. Cuff him soundly, but never draw your sword," said Sir Toby. "If I do not," bragged Sir Andrew, swaggering away. "Come, let us see what happens," said Fabian. "I dare lay any money it would be nothing after all," said Sir Toby shrewdly. End of section 25. Section 26 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Macleod. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. 12th Night, Part 4. Yellow Stockings. Sebastian and Viola. Olivia was very sad when Viola, or the young page Cesario, as she thought her, went away saying that no woman should ever win his heart. And feeling that Malvolio's grave dignity just suited her present mood, she asked for her steward. "He is coming, madam, but in very strange manner," said the naughty Maria. "He is surely possessed, madam." "Why, what is the matter? Doth he rave?" "No, madam. He does nothing but smile. Your ladyship were best to have some guard about you if he come, for sure the man has something wrong with his wits." "Go, call him hither," said Olivia. When Maria returned with Malvolio, Olivia was amazed to see the extraordinary change that had come over her usually sober and sedate steward. Malvolio advanced with mincing step and many fantastic gestures, which he intended to represent gracious affability. His lantern jaws and severe features were twisted into strange grimaces, which he imagined to be fascinating smiles. His lanky legs were encased in brilliant yellow stockings, and were further adorned with cross-gartering from the ankle upwards. Olivia thought he must certainly be bereft of his wits, especially when, in answer to all her questions, he poured forth a series of incomprehensible remarks. They were really quotations from the letter he had picked up, but Olivia, of course, did not know this, and to her they sounded like senseless jargon. Malvolio kept on bowing and smirking and kissing his hand to Olivia, while he waved Maria aside with intense scorn. Olivia was really distressed to think of the sudden calamity that had befallen the poor man's wits, for she valued his honesty and faithful service. She gave directions that her people should take especial care of him, and sent Maria to find Sir Toby to look after him. Malvolio was quite pleased to find himself of such importance, and continued his self-complacent reflections on the greatness which he thought he had achieved. He was firmly convinced that Olivia really liked him, and that she had only sent for Sir Toby on purpose that he might be severe with him, as the letter advised. When Maria reappeared with Sir Toby and Fabian, he treated them all with the most lofty disdain. They were greatly delighted with the success of their trick, and determined to carry on the joke still further. Pretending to think that Malvolio had really lost his wits, they had him bound and carried to a dark room. Then Feste the clown disguised his voice, and spoke to him as if he were a curate come to visit him in his misfortune. He had an argument with Malvolio, in which the poor man made it quite apparent that he was still in possession of his proper reason. But Feste, or Sir Topus, as he called himself for this occasion, would not hold out any hope of release, and, as far as Malvolio could tell in his dark prison, presently departed without bringing him any comfort. Sir Toby now began to think the joke had gone far enough, and that it was time to release Malvolio as soon as it could conveniently be done. He knew that Olivia would be seriously displeased if she came to learn what had happened, and he was already so deep in disgrace with his niece that he could not with safety pursue the sport any further. He therefore told the clown to speak to Malvolio in his own voice. Feste began singing one of his songs as if he had just come near, and Malvolio, recognizing it, called piteously to him for help. "Good fool, as ever you will deserve well at my hand, help me to a candle, and pen, ink, and paper. As I am a gentleman, I will live to be thankful to you for it." The clown still went on teasing Malvolio a little before he would grant his request, but finally said he would get what he wanted, and went off to fetch a light and writing materials. Malvolio wrote his letter, which the clown duly delivered, and which clearly proved that the poor man was quite sane, though justly indignant at the way in which he had been treated. Olivia ordered his immediate release, and when Malvolio came and bitterly reproached her for the letter she had written and the way in which he had been befooled, she assured him that the fault was none of hers, and that the handwriting was Maria's. Fabian then stepped forward and took the whole blame on himself and Sir Toby. He said they had played this trick on Malvolio because of his ill nature towards themselves. Maria had only written the letter under great persuasion from Sir Toby, who now, out of recompense, had married her. Fabian added that he thought the playful malice with which the joke was carried out deserved laughter rather than revenge, if the injuries on both sides were justly weighed. "Alas, poor fool, how have they baffled thee?" said Olivia. "I'll be revenged on the whole pack of you," cried Malvolio, taking himself off in a terrible fury, and the laughter of the others was checked by the stern rebuke of Olivia. He has been treated most shamefully. 12th Night. Part 5. Sebastian and Viola. Olivia, wishing to speak once more with the young page Cesario, sent the clown in search of him, but Feste by chance happened to meet Sebastian instead, and thinking he was the person he was in search of, he delivered his lady's message to him. Sebastian could not understand in the least what he meant, but he was still further surprised when a very foolish-looking gentleman ran up to him and struck him a blow, saying, "Now, sir, have I met you again? There's for you." "Why, there's for you, and there, retorted Sebastian, repaying his blows with interest. "Are all the people mad?" Sir Andrew was surprised and very much disgusted to find the young man whom they had taken for a coward could strike so vigorously with his fists. Sir Toby interfered on behalf of his timorous friend, and he and Sebastian had drawn their swords to fight in earnest, when Olivia, warned by Feste, came hurrying up. She sternly commanded Sir Toby to stay his hand, and implored Sebastian, whom she took for Cesario, to pardon the rudeness of her kinsman, and to go with her into the house. "Either I am mad, or else this is a dream," thought the bewildered Sebastian when he heard this beautiful lady speaking to him as if he were already a dear friend. But dream or not, it was extremely pleasant, and he was quite willing that the illusion should continue. "If it be thus to dream, let me sleep still," he said to himself. This handsome young gallant was by no means so indifferent to the Countess Olivia as Cesario had been, and when she proposed that they should be married at once, he was quite willing to consent. He would gladly have consulted his friend Antonio, the sea captain, but this was not possible, for on going to the Elephant Inn, which was the place of meeting arranged, Antonio had never appeared to keep his appointment. The reason we know already, although Sebastian did not. Antonio had been arrested by Duke Orsino's officers. The marriage had only taken place 2 hours when Orsino, accompanied by Viola, came to Olivia's house, and almost immediately afterwards Antonio was led in by the officers. Now came fresh confusion. Antonio again thought Viola was Sebastian, and taxed him bitterly with his ingratitude. Viola stoutly denied ever having seen Antonio before, except on the one occasion when he had saved him from the valiant Sir Andrew. Antonio declared that for the last 3 months they had never parted company, day or night, whereupon the Duke declared his words must be madness, because for the last 3 months the youth had been his own attendant. Then came Olivia, who thought that Viola was the man to whom she had been married, and amazed her by calling her husband. The priest who had actually married them was called as witness, and declared this was true. It was now the Duke's turn to be indignant with Viola for her supposed deceit and treachery, for he thought that when he had sent Cesario to woo Olivia on his behalf, the page had taken the opportunity to secure the lady for himself. Matters were in this tangled state of confusion when all was happily put right by the arrival of Sebastian. When the twins stood together, everyone was amazed at the resemblance. The brother and sister were delighted to meet once more. Antonio found that his friend was not the monster of ingratitude he had taken him for, and Olivia was restored to a handsome and devoted husband, who had no intention of denying his own wife. Orsino might perhaps have been sad at discovering that the Countess Olivia was now lost to him forever, but while a charming young bride stood ready at his hand, he was not unwilling to be consoled. Viola's faithful service met its reward. "Since you have called me master for so long," said the Duke, "here is my hand. You shall from this time be your master's mistress." Olivia said that Viola and the Duke must now look on her as a sister, and that the wedding should take place from her house. So they all trooped merrily away, and Feste the clown was left singing to himself. When that I was a little tiny boy, with hey, ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to a man's estate, with a hey, ho, the wind and the rain, 'gainst knaves and thieves men shut their gate, for the rain it raineth every day. A great while ago the world began, with a hey, ho, the wind and the rain, but that's all one. Our play is done. We'll strive to please you every day. End of section 26.
Section 27 of the Shakespeare Storybook. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason in Panama. The Shakespeare Storybook by Mary Macleod. Romeo and Juliet, Part 1, The Masked Ball. There was a long-standing feud between the houses of Montague and Capulet, two of the noblest families of ancient Italy, and the narrow streets of Verona rang constantly with the sound of brawl and strife. The enmity between the heads of the family and their noble kinsmen descended, of course, to their retainers, and the servants of both houses never met without quarrel and frequent bloodshed. The Prince of Verona vainly tried to stop this incessant bickering. Again and again it burst out with renewed fury. 3 serious outbreaks had already occurred in the city, when not only the servants of the families, but even respectable citizens had joined in the fray, and became for the moment furious partisans of one side or the other. Finally, the prince, enraged by another of these skirmishes, started by the servants, but joined in afterwards by the heads of the houses themselves, pronounced sentence indignantly on Montague and Capulet. If ever they disturbed the streets again, he declared, their lives should pay the forfeit of the peace. When the rioters had dispersed and the prince had retired, Lady Montague began to make anxious inquiry about her son, saying how glad she was that he had not been in the fray. Her nephew Benvolio replied that an hour before dawn, driven to walk abroad by a troubled mind, he had seen young Romeo walking in a grove of sycamore outside the city, but that, as soon as Romeo became aware of his approach, he stole away into the covert of the wood. To this Montague added that his son had been seen there many mornings, evidently in deep sorrow, and that when he was in the house he penned himself up in his own room, shut up his windows, locked out the fair daylight, and made an artificial night for himself. Montague neither knew the cause of this strange behaviour, nor could he learn it of him, though both he and his friends had earnestly entreated Romeo to tell them the cause of his grief. At this moment the young man himself came in sight, and Benvolio hastily begged his uncle and Lady Montague to step aside, saying that he would certainly find out what was the matter. Perhaps Benvolio used more tact in dealing with his cousin, or perhaps Romeo was at last not sorry to confide his trouble. At any rate, he confessed to Benvolio that the reason of his unhappiness was that he was in love with a beautiful lady called Rosaline, who was very cold and indifferent, and did not in the least return his affection. As there seemed no hope of Romeo's winning the lady, Benvolio very sensibly advised him to think no more about her, but to try to find someone else equally beautiful and charming. Romeo replied that this was quite impossible, but Benvolio did not at all despair of effecting his cure. And, as it happened, the very remedy suggested was successful, and that within the next few hours. This was how it came about. The rival house of Capulet, like that of Montague, boasted of but one child, but while the Montagues' was a son, Romeo, the Capulets' only surviving offspring was a daughter, a lovely young girl called Juliet. Up to the present Juliet had been too youthful to take part in the gaieties of the world, but a certain noble young count called Paris, a kinsman of the Prince of Verona, had already been attracted by her charms, and now begged permission from her father to pay his suit to her. Capulet replied that Juliet was very young still to think of marriage, but that if Paris liked to try to win her heart, and succeeded in doing so, he would willingly add his consent to hers. Further, he said that he was holding that night an old accustomed feast, to which he had invited a number of guests, including many beautiful maidens. Among them Paris would behold his daughter, and he could then compare her with others, and judge whether she still surpassed them, as he now thought. He was to see all, hear all, and to like her the best whose merit should be the most. The servant sent out by Capulet to carry his invitations was no scholar, and happening to meet Romeo and Benvolio, he appealed to them to read over to him the list of invited guests. Among the names written there, Romeo found that of Rosaline, with other admired beauties of Verona, and Benvolio advised him to go to the ball, and without prejudice to compare her face with some of the other ladies present, when he would find that, after all, she was no such paragon. Romeo replied that he would go, not for this reason, but to delight in the splendour of his own lady. Even although it was to an enemy's house he was going, and he was placing himself in grave peril if his identity were discovered, it was not a difficult matter for Romeo to gain admittance to the Capulets, for all the guests were to go in fancy dress and wear masks. Romeo chose the disguise of a pilgrim. When the night came he was still sad at heart, and declared he would join in no dancing. He had a soul of lead that bore him to the ground, so that he could hardly move. Besides Benvolio, on this night Romeo had with him another friend, a very light-hearted, witty gentleman called Mercutio, a kinsman of the Prince of Verona. As they went along, Mercutio tried to laugh Romeo out of his melancholy mood, and to chase away his sadness with his gay chatter. But nothing he could say served to cheer up Romeo; a dark misgiving seemed to hang over him, and it was with no festive spirit that he entered the brilliantly lighted hall of Capulet's house. All here was splendour and gaiety. Crowds of quaintly dressed figures wandered to and fro. Capulet himself, with his daughter Juliet and others of his house, received the guests, and gave them a hearty welcome. Then the music began, and the dancers grouped themselves for the stately and graceful measures of those days. Romeo was late in arriving, and the dancing had already begun when he entered the hall. He stood for a while looking on at the scene. His Rosaline, no doubt, was there, among other proud beauties of Verona, but to night her sway was to be broken for ever. For there among the dancers was one who far surpassed her fellows, even as a snowy dove trooping with crows. In the dazzling radiance of her first youthful bloom moved the daughter of the house, and when he saw this slender maiden with her peerless beauty, and her locks of shining gold, all lesser feelings melted out of Romeo's heart, and he knew he had never really loved till now. Romeo's half-uttered exclamations of rapture were overheard by a nephew of Lady Capulet's, a fiery nobleman called Tybalt, always ready for brawls and quarrelling. "This, by his voice, should be a Montague," he said, and immediately ordered his page to fetch his rapier. "How dares the slave come hither, covered with an antic face, to fleer in scorn at our solemnity? Now, by the honour of my kin, I would hold it no sin to strike him dead." "Why, how now, kinsman? Why do you storm so?" asked Capulet. "Uncle, this is a Montague, our foe, a villain who has come here in spite to scorn at our solemnity. Young Romeo, is it? It is he, that villain Romeo." "Content you, gentle cousin, let him alone," said Capulet. "He bears himself like a gallant gentleman, and to say truth, Verona boasts him to be a virtuous and well-governed youth. I would not for the wealth of all the town do him any wrong here in my house. Therefore be patient, take no notice of him. It is my will, and if you respect it, show an amiable face, and put off those frowns, which are not a pleasing expression at a feast." "It fits when such a villain is a guest," said Tybalt sullenly. "I'll not endure him." "He shall be endured," said Capulet sternly. "What, goodman boy, I say he shall, go to. Am I the master here, or you? Go to. You'll not endure him. You'll make a mutiny among my guests. You'll be the man." "Why, uncle, it's a shame," persisted Tybalt. "Go to, go to," cried the exasperated old man. "You are a saucy boy. Go. Be quiet, or more light, more light, I'll make you quiet." Burning with wrath against Romeo, and furious at the rebuke which his presumption had won from his uncle, Tybalt withdrew, silenced for the moment, but his heart filled with the bitterest spite, and determining to be revenged at the first opportunity for the humiliation he had suffered. In the meanwhile the dance was ended, and Romeo had been able to approach Juliet. In his rôle of a pilgrim he carried on with her a half jesting conversation which barely veiled the deep devotion he was already beginning to feel, and, according to the customs of those days, he was even permitted to salute the lady with a courteous kiss. Their conversation was interrupted by Juliet's nurse, who came to summon Juliet to her mother, and then Romeo learnt for the first time that the young girl who had so enchanted him was the daughter of the house, a Capulet, the child of his foe. And a few minutes later, Juliet, also making eager inquiry about the young guest in the guise of a pilgrim, heard that his name was Romeo, a Montague, the only son of the great enemy of her father's house. End of Section 27